Hey everyone, welcome to our fourth edition of the Recruiting webinar. I'm just going to wait one more minute for a couple people to join us. So feel free to grab a coffee or get comfortable. We'll just be waiting one more minute while people join. Okay. Yeah, okay. So I think we'll get started. So welcome to everyone who just joined us. Welcome to the fourth edition of the Recruiting webinar. This week we'll be covering hiring for remote teams. And we have a special guest who's joining us to speak on the topic. If you don't know me already, my name is Adri Smith. I'm the content marketing manager for recruit.ee. And basically, I'm responsible for the blog and hopefully all the good stuff that you see there. You might want to keep an eye out actually on the blog this week because we actually have quite an exciting blog piece coming out at the end of this week from a recruiter who actually recruited remotely from her camper van for a year. So definitely keep an eye out on it and check it out. And Recruity, by the way, if you haven't heard of us or not a user already, we are a talent acquisition platform that's designed to make collaborative hiring an easy reality for you and to bring you closer to making great teams. Just a couple housekeeping things to get out of the way first. Basically, we'll circulate all of the information and all the follow up on our TAinnovators group on Facebook. You should have received a link to it in the invitation that you received, but you'll also receive another link in the follow-up by email. So join us there, and we'll have the recording. So if you want to share it with any of your colleagues who weren't able to make it or friends who might be interested, feel free to do so. Also, if you have any questions for myself or for Sarah throughout the webinar, please feel free to leave it in the question section and we'll get back to it at the Q&A at the end of our chat. So without further ado, let me introduce our guest today, Sara Bent from Hotjar. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me on.
Yeah. Would you please be able to give us like a short intro to you and how you kind of got into recruiting for remote roles?
Yep, sure. So I'm Sarah. I'm the people ops specialist at Hotjar. So I've been here for 2 years now, and my role has recently changed from being recruiter to people ops specialist. I kind of fell into recruitment after I'd graduated from university. I was doing personnel logistics, which involves some ad hoc contractor recruitment. And from there, it grew. My first experience of hiring remotely was when I was working for an English as a second language company out in Costa Rica. So I was hiring for teachers for this, and people tended to be based in their home countries. So I would have to do all the interviews via Skype and the applications online. So it's my first taste of hiring remotely. And then when I came home from there, I got this job here with Hotjar.
Yeah. So it might be a bit strange at the moment, but Sarah's actually located outside of Inverness currently, and I'm here in Amsterdam. But Sarah, you're now hiring for roles where?
Currently, our roles, most of them tend to be focused within the EMEA time zone, so Europe and Africa, and we also have roles open in the Americas just now as well.
Okay, cool. So I know, well, obviously I know the Hotjar story. I think it's quite interesting, but not everyone here knows it. Would you be able to kind of give us the lowdown of, the Hotjar story?
Yeah, sure. So Hotjar it was incorporated about 4.5 years ago now. It was started by our 5 founders who were all based in Malta. So we have 3 Maltese and 2 Swedish founders. Even though they all lived really, really close together in the tiny island of Malta, they wanted from the start to have a remote company. Even if that meant just calling into each other from a very small distance apart. But they wanted to start it off remotely and scale it from there. So they started off with a couple of other Maltese-based people, and then started, I think after the first 2 is when we got Recruity and started hiring via Recruity from there. So we've jumped up from 5 to 70 team members spread all over the world. I think we're up to 17 different countries with 21 nationalities. And yet it's definitely still in the startup stage, but we've grown a lot and continue to do so.
Yeah, that's quite a lot of nationalities.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're definitely going to delve into some of the, yeah, how you kind of manage that whole process. But just kind of straight off the bat, what for you working as a remote recruiter, what are the core differences between, the typical on-site, you're working with a team in an office, and yeah, what you're doing currently, which is remote recruiting?
I guess the most obvious one is just the lack of face-to-face interaction. So where interviews would usually be in the office, obviously we can't do that. I think the way remote companies tend to hire, and it's definitely true of Hotjar, is we put a lot of emphasis onto the hiring process overall. So it's a much longer process than an average normal office-based company. I
Mm-hmm.
think we do this to really spend that time getting to know the person really well. So once we are working all remotely, we don't get that same amount of, face-to-face time with each other. We meet each other twice a year. So it's really important to us to make sure that we've got a good feel for the person before they start off with us. So for us, the difference with remote recruiting is, yeah, really elongating that hiring process. We can get to know them all better. And to find out as well whether or not the remote job is going to work for the person. I think some people are probably more suited and still prefer the office-based environment where it's more sociable, you have people around you. So remote's not for everyone, and we really want to make sure we're finding the people it's suited to.
Mm-hmm. How for you, are there any like telltale signs at the very beginning where you can really spot who would be good for recruiting for remote work?
It definitely gets easier as we go on, but I think one of the things that can stand out sometimes from the application stage, so when the person is first applied to us via that recruitee application form, I think there's sometimes it will stand out the person is looking for more of the digital nomad style of remote life. So the idea was probably better suited to freelance work. So something more they can jump in and out of and do from, like you see all the adverts of people working from a beach in Thailand, this type of lifestyle, which is
Yeah.
great and sounds like a lot of fun. But with working here at Hotjar, we do work the full time, 40 hours a week. So we are looking for people who are focused on the role as opposed to focus purely on working remotely.
Mm-hmm. So for you, there's a key difference between somebody who's a freelancer who might apply for a remote job versus somebody who is an actual full-time remote worker is a bit more long-term then.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you can still find people who are looking specifically for remote work. I know I was when I found this role.
Mm-hmm.
But it's that balance of wanting a role that suits you and wanting your career to continue. It just happens to be remote.
Yeah. So I think from a practical perspective, it's quite interesting, the whole dynamic that you have at Hotjar. For you, what does your recruitment process look like without this immediate face-to-face contact? And
So
how has the remote nature kind of shaped the dynamic in the recruitment process?
so we have a 5-stage application process. So again, it's a much longer process than usual. We start off with an application stage. So the application form is specific to each role. So everybody comes in again via recruitee. And once we've reviewed at this first stage, for anybody who we think seems suitable, we pass through to a video stage, which I don't think is anybody's favourite part of our application process, but all of us within Hotjar have had to go through this as well. So we send the candidate out a list of a few questions that we'd like them to answer, and they record themselves doing this. So I think a lot of people are quite nervous doing it, but it's a really good way for us to get to know the person a little bit better. And before we jump into that full hour-long interview, which is the next stage. So it's an interview usually on Google Meets, usually with myself and the hiring manager, or perhaps a different person in the hiring team. And this is where we can really get to them a lot better, obviously give them a chance to learn more about us as well.
Mhm.
And then the final stage of our process, and this is where I think Hotjar's recruitment differs quite a lot from different companies, but we have a 3-day paid task that we ask people to do. And again, it's designed for each role. So it's
Mhm.
try and give the idea of a taste of what the person would be doing if they're actually with us and working here in Hotjar. We add everybody at this stage onto Slack so they can ask questions about the role and about the tasks they're working on. But they can also
Mhm.
just hopefully get a really good impression as to what Hotjar is like as a company and what the atmosphere is like. They get added into our what we call the kitchen channel, which is like the general kind of chit chat nonsense channel. So the aim of this stage is really to give the person this really good impression as a really key impression as to what it's like working here, what the people are like, how we interact with each other. And then obviously it gives us a really good chance to learn much more about them as well and learn about their working styles.
Mm-hmm.
It does add quite a chunk to our recruitment timeline, unfortunately, but um, we think we tend to get quite a good positive reaction from the candidates who are at the stage, and to us, it's definitely the part I would recommend most of all of our recruitment process. It's the most useful and beneficial in finding out what that person is really like.
And do you have any kind of rules in the kitchen channel, given that there might be people there who, yeah, are new to Hotjar or, yeah, are still on their trial?
So nothing that's said to anybody at task going in. Generally, it's the typical avoid politics and religion. Again, having a lot of people from a lot of different countries and cultures and whatnot, but inevitably it will go towards, especially politics, quite often. But no, no particular rules. Anybody who joins is just we want them to be themselves. We want to find out what they're like, and we want them to see what we are like.
And are there kind of any things that you look forward to when candidates do join that channel? So do you look for a special kind of engagement? Do you is there something that you're looking for in like specifically?
I think for the task stage, it's more to do with how they're working necessarily
Mhm.
than how they're interacting in the kitchen. Some people will interact a lot in the kitchen, which is great, but some people are just, quieter or maybe more introverted. So we don't expect a certain level. And obviously, again, it just comes down the person's personality type. But how they interact with the team that they're working more closely with to get their task done, that's a
Mhm.
really key area for us. We want to see how much they reach out to people, how well they receive feedback is a really important thing for us, and receiving that feedback and asking for it as well. So rather than the how they're interacting in the more lighthearted kitchen side, we're really
Yeah.
interested to see how they're working with the team in their actual task.
Okay. Um, so it seems like you really put your company culture at the core of the recruitment process, and it's a big part of your recruitment strategy. How do you really make sure that people are good fits? I know you said that the process is longer. You try to get to know them. You add them to this channel. Are there any other ways that you really try to get to the core of your candidates?
So yeah, having this extended recruitment process is definitely a part of it. It's really important to us to spend a lot of time getting to know somebody,
Yeah.
and it does work both ways as well. There's this element of making sure that we're right for them. So the person might seem great for Hotjar, but we might all of a sudden, once they've got to know us better, perhaps we're not the type of company or the type of mindset they're looking for. So it's important both ways to make sure we know each other and we're sure about this. In terms of trying to check out how good a fit somebody is for our company culture or our values, more to the point, we try to tailor questions at each stage towards this.
Mhm.
For example, within one of our values, should I say, it speaks about giving and receiving feedback. So there's questions that we can ask throughout the application and interview stages. And obviously it's something we do check for during the task stage. We have a lot of different personalities within Hotjar, a very wide range of people, but there's this
Yeah.
common thread which would be really hard to define, but I think it kind of links us all through this connection that we have to our values, the company's core values, and how we act and operate being mirrored within those. There's actually a
Mhm.
really interesting quote from Recruitee's MidWeekRead today, I think, saying about hiring an attitude, not just experience and qualification. So a lot of what we're looking for is this person's attitude, and we try to tailor the questions even from the application stage to try and find out what their attitude towards different things, and especially in the working life, is. And again, that hiring process, having all these different stages, it really is to try and give us much more time to find out what the person's like, and if they seem like they're going to be a good match for our mindset and how we work.
Okay. And from I guess another practical short question, like a practical issue, does the extended recruitment process ever pose a problem to getting candidates in? Because I know a lot of recruiters are very focused on their time to hire and understanding that candidates continue to field offers from and well interviews and offers from other companies. How do you manage that while staying true to this extended recruitment process to get to know them better?
So we try to be very upfront about this from the offset. So on our careers page, we have a little diagram that shows our recruitment process. So everybody knows what each stage is before they've even applied with us. When they apply and they get the response email to let them know that we've received their application, we give them a time frame as to how long it's likely to be until they get back to us. And we actually link people as well from that first email to our team manual, our public team manual, and in there we have some recruitment FAQs, which lists, which also speaks to the time frame. So we just
Mm-hmm.
try to make sure people are very aware about this. Obviously, we know we can be up against some companies who are moving faster, and chances are the person applying to us is probably applying elsewhere as well. I think for us, it also plays into finding the person who's the right match for Hotjar and vice versa. If somebody seems like they're going to be work really well here, but also that we're going to work really well for them, chances
Mm-hmm.
are they're very often will find out that somebody else has been going through a process as well elsewhere, but decided that they'd rather keep going with Hotjar, even though we do have that longer process, which again, it does then add into narrowing down people who are definitely right for us and we're right for them.
Right. So you spoke a little bit before about your company's values. How has having remote teams really shaped your core values as a company?
I think it's actually worked both ways as well. I think our remote team has also impacted our values. So
Mm-hmm.
Hotjar's core values, we originally had 8, which have been written out by the founders. And at some point, I think earlier this year, when our company was around 50 members, we had this external culture consultant, I guess you could call him, come in and survey us all. And basically, we were wanted to rewrite the core values to reflect more accurately the people who were in Hotjar, not just based on what the founders had first written. And it turns out they stayed very, very alike. So what the team thought was still very true to what the founders originally written. And I think a lot of that is because they have always had this emphasis on hiring people who are true to these values. So we had the values, we hired based on them, and then with the people we'd hired, we redid the values and they stayed very similar. So I think some of that is really due to being a remote company as well. One of our values is build trust with transparency. I think
Mm-hmm.
working remotely, we're not all in an office together. We don't see each other throughout the year except our 2 company retreats. So it's really important to us to be very transparent with each other and very open with each other. Communication is such a key skill for working remotely to make sure that you're all on the same page and you know what each other are doing. Work with respect is another one of our values, which again, we're hiring from all over the world. So we need to make sure that people are respectful of each other, of all the backgrounds, the cultures, all the differences that we have within Hotjar.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, so I think all of this is reflected in our values and how our team interacts with them.
Nice. And I think the next question I have here, are there any deal breakers that you have when it comes to hiring remote employees? Like qualities, statements, indications early that you might spot early on that can raise a red flag, i.e., maybe it relates to the core values, maybe it relates to skills. Have you found that there's some consistency?
I guess they're definitely the normal ones you'd look out for, even if you weren't remote, in terms of the skill set, but also the mindset. And sometimes these things can come through in the application and whatnot. What I mentioned earlier about people seem like they're more focused on working remotely for Hotjar are the wrong reasons. Not to say they'd be the wrong reasons for other companies, but having the right motivation, I guess, for wanting to work remotely and wanting to work with Hotjar. That's something that can come out at the very first application stage. Um, I think a lack of preference or leaning towards teamwork, if there's any hint of that earlier on, we have to be such a strong team focused company, again,
Yeah.
because we are remote. So we're very spread out and it's important that we can rely on each other. So if there's any hint of that that comes through, these are all things which are easier to spot the later into the process you get. But things like being a clear communicator as well, because
Mm-hmm.
again, we have to communicate with each other very, very well to keep things ticking along and moving. And a lot of our communication is written. It's on Slack and email. So somebody who is not a clear communicator or doesn't do well expressing their ideas, that could also prove to be difficult.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely easier by the time we get to the interview and task stage to find out things which are much more Hotjar specific qualities, like communication, taking feedback, etc.
Okay. And how, so working remotely and having the people be also remote themselves, How do you manage to create a positive candidate experience for your remote applicants?
I think a lot of this is, again, as I mentioned, about managing expectations. So making sure that people know, especially in terms of time frame, because we do have a much longer recruitment process, and we want to make sure that people are aware of that going straight into it. So, for example, just now at this time of year, because a lot of us are going to be off over the Christmas and New Year break, and the entire company was actually just out the week before last at our company retreat. So to alert people to this, we have a notification on our career site and also the email that people receive once they've applied to us. It's an added additional paragraph just now kind of explaining about all these times off and just letting them know we might be a bit slower than usual, but really just trying to manage expectations as to when people think they're going to hear back from us. So each time we email somebody throughout this application, we have a little diagram that shows them which stage of our application process we're at, and we let them know how long it should be until the next time we get back to them. We try to really under promise and over deliver with this. Over promise and under deliver. I think I always get that one the wrong way around. But overestimate really, because we want to make sure that we have a bit of leeway on our side in case something comes up, which inevitably will. We would much rather say a long time and be consistently under that than the other way around. Not to say we can't always get better at that as well, but definitely something we try to do to create this positive candidate experience.
Mm-hmm.
We also have, each time we reject any candidate at either the video, the interview, or the task stage, we actually send out a Hotjar survey with an NPS survey. So people can give us feedback based on this as well. And then we can take this feedback and adjust accordingly. The same with our Glassdoor feedback. It's a great place for if we're going to get any feedback, be it negative or positive, but we can react to that and make sure we're building into our process for future candidates.
Yeah. How
Um,
how do you respond to negative glass? Is it you that actually has to respond, or is it often someone else?
it's there's a few of us who've responded to them.
Okay. How do you manage that whole process?
It was a great success story, to be honest. So I first set up Glassdoor for Hotjar when I started working here, and we were getting some negative interview reviews. So obviously there's company reviews and the interview reviews, and we were getting quite consistently negative reviews for it about two different areas. One was the time it took to get back to people, and the other was about our compensation. So we made tweaks based on these. We now include our compensation range for each role on every single job description. So we're very transparent about it, which also ties in with our core values. So it's right there. So that kind of helped to alleviate one area that we've been getting some negative feedback about. We
Mm-hmm.
also changed our process and how our pipeline works to try and alleviate the time it's taking to get back to people as well. And again, we really hammer home on trying to let people know how long it will be. So yeah, it was I'm really glad we got that negative feedback on Glassdoor because it really helped us to overhaul our process and make it better. And it turned around. Since then, I was actually looking at it the other day. I think I could be remembering wrong, but it's something like 70 something percent positive now.
Wow.
So yeah, we managed to take that and really turn it around.
Yeah, I feel like Glassdoor is such a tricky subject, right? Because the second that you create a Glassdoor, you're kind of inviting yourself open to, yeah, I guess both the positive and the negative. But I feel, well, personally, I feel like it's often the people who have a negative experience that do end up going to Glassdoor.
Hmm.
Was that kind of already an internal conversation that you had when you created it, or you just kind of went ahead and did it?
I think it's super useful, even if it's going to be negative. So I was surprised we didn't have a Glassdoor profile. When I was applying to Hotjar, I looked them up and like, oh, that's weird. Especially because you hear a lot of positive comment around Hotjar. So our
Yeah.
company reviews, we actually have a 5-star company review and 100% rating of our CEO. So it's super positive that we do have a Glassdoor profile. And in
Yeah.
terms of the negative reviews, I think you're right. I think we've managed to turn this around, so perhaps it's less true than I think we all think. But there does tend to be a tendency to want to go and leave a public review the more disgruntled you are with something.
Yeah.
So it makes it extra wonderful that we managed to turn it around to be mostly positive reviews. But I'd much rather know about a negative candidate experience so we can react to it accordingly than not know about it at all.
Yeah. And you guys also send around NPS surveys,
Hmm.
correct? Yeah.
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 Um, Yeah, these are really interesting feedback to read through as well. It's interesting as well, we actually get a better score the further along the process somebody has left us at. So even if they've left us at the final stage, we tend to get more positive feedback then, which it's difficult to tell exactly why based on the comments that people leave on them, but I think a lot to do with it is probably our team, which also adds, I think, to the positive experience candidates have with us. We just have such a wonderful team at Hotjar. So the interactions that candidates will have, they're with these wonderful people who all have really good rapport between each other. So at the interview stage, there'll be two of us on the call with the candidate. We're very informal in the company, so that definitely comes through in our interviews as well. And then once they get to the task stage and they can interact with the entire company, there's just a really nice atmosphere within Hotjar. So I think it helps to add to a nice candidate experience. That and the fact that we do include them in Slack at the task stage, and it is a paid task as well. So we respect their time and the fact they're taking this out to do this work for us. So yeah, I think all of this contributes to the overall experience people have with us.
Yeah, that's quite well, I feel like number one, asking for feedback and yeah, it is consistent with one of your one of the qualities that you also look for in candidates is that they're
Mm-hmm.
receptive to feedback. Um, but I think it's also quite impressive that you do get such good reviews from people despite not having actually physically met them. So then it really kind of brings to light quite a bigger question, like, do you need to actually meet someone face to face in order to establish a connection with them that's good at a nice professional level, that you can create a nice team within that. So are there ever any times in your recruitment process or even outside that you do wish there was kind of some face-to-face contact?
I'm really glad that we do have our 2 company retreats a year. It does make a difference to, I guess, how you interact with people. So even if I haven't met somebody up until, say, we hired them just after one company retreat, and I don't get to meet them until 6 months later, you can still have a great relationship built up with them. I think it helps that we tend to have we have calls together quite often. So as an entire company, we're on a call once a week together every Friday afternoon. Most people will leave their cameras on, which I think just that small thing makes a difference to it as well. And then we have our company monthly meetings as well. So we do have quite a lot of entire company interaction times. We do things within Hotjar to try to encourage a lot of cross-team collaboration for work, but also just communication in terms of social communication as well. But I do love the fact that we get together twice a year, and then it's just really interesting to be able to meet somebody in person and see what they're like, how they interact, what makes them tick.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think when I invited you to this webinar, you were actually in Malaga, no?
In Tenerife.
Oh,
Yeah. So we had our company meetup there, but I think was it 14 of us went out a week early and spent the week together as well.
oh, super nice.
Hmm.
I guess yeah, it makes up that makes up for the lack of face-to-face contact then.
Yeah, definitely.
So what are your tricks of the trade or must-have tips for the first-time remote recruiter? Because not everyone has had this experience. What would be your top tips for them?
So one of the tips I think I've probably said most often to our hiring managers, and the one I've heard them repeat back more, is to smile. It's such an easy thing, but if you're on a call with somebody on the interview or the task call, we don't always have our cameras on. Perhaps the internet connection isn't so good, so it's better sound quality to have your cameras off. But with your camera off, that poor candidate is just staring at a blank screen, which isn't necessarily a great experience, and they obviously then can't see you for the feedback, and it's difficult for them to know how things are going. But if you're just smiling when you're talking to them, it makes such a difference to your tone, how you come across, and think the overall atmosphere. So I think that's probably the advice I've given most often to the hiring managers I work with here in Hotjar. Um, for for the video calls as well, it's such a natural time to be nervous when you're going to be interviewed by somebody. And again, it doesn't help that they don't get any body language feedback as they're going along.
Mhm.
So trying to make sure, I always think it's the interviewer's job to make sure the candidate is as comfortable and as relaxed and reassured as they can be. Because the more confident somebody is, or the more comfortable, the more you're going to get out of them as well. So it's important for both sides. So I
Mhm.
think if somebody's particularly nervous, make sure that you're trying to, loosen them up and make them less nervous. I think asking questions about something you know they're particularly passionate or knowledgeable about can help, because then the person can talk more confidently and get into a stride as to what they're talking about. Um, we actually link everybody to our team manual as well, and encourage people to have a look through this. Completely up to them whether or not people go and look through every single page in there, but it really helps, again, to add to the atmosphere of finding out what Hotjar is like and the atmosphere within the company. So I think that's a good trick as well for remote recruitment specifically. Obviously, in normal recruitment, the person will walk physically into your office for the interview, so they're going to get a bit of a taste as to what the atmosphere is like there, or how people are interacting, which you can't get when applying remotely. So,
Yeah.
linking to our team manual, we aim to, again, just give a sense as to what Hotjar is like. And again, definitely everything about managing expectations. Most remote companies, I think, tend to have a different than usual hiring pipeline. So making sure that candidates are aware of this upfront.
Yeah, I think that's a consistent theme across all recruitment processes is yeah, constantly updating candidates, but I think it becomes even more important when you're hiring remotely as well.
Mm-hmm.
And tools. I think this is often a favorite question. What are your favorite tools or most useful tools for recruiting remotely?
In terms of recruiting tools specifically, recruit.ee is actually the only one we use. So recruit.ee.
Is
um,
one that you recommend?
I would definitely recommend it. And my main advice, if you're going to start hiring remotely, just hiring in general, don't try and keep track of people via a spreadsheet because you will quickly go insane. Obviously, the benefit of hiring remotely means that people from all over the world or to your particular time zones can apply for your job. So you tend to get more applicants because they're not specific to the small location that you're hiring for. So if you're trying to keep track of this via a spreadsheet, it's going to go wrong quite quickly, I think.
Yeah.
So we use recruit.ee, and it's super useful to be able to guide candidates all the way through the pipeline. Recruit.ee are actually coming out with more and more features and add-ons that I can't keep up with just now. I need to make sure I spend some time in the new year making sure I'm making the most of them all. So yeah, it's super useful to be able to keep a track of where everybody is, be able to find people again, share with your hiring managers as well, so that your full hiring team are on the same page as to what's going on. Yeah.
And let's talk future trends. So, what do you think? Is Hotjar kind of ahead of the curve? Have they gone on to the remote recruiting trends way earlier? Do you think remote recruiting is actually going to become more prevalent, or do you think it's going to be still limited to only a few companies?
So I do think we have got onto the remote trend pretty fairly early on, given that especially we've been around for 4.5 years now. And I think it's going to keep getting more and more prevalent. I think more and more companies will start allowing their employees to work remotely, as well as have more and more companies who are just completely remote the way Hotjar is. So with that, inevitably, you're going to have remote recruitment. It just makes sense as well for being able to pull from this much wider applicant pool. So we can have people even in our EMEA time zone jobs. That's anybody in all of Europe, all of Africa. There's a lot of different candidates that we can possibly pull from. So yeah, I think it makes sense, and it's inevitable that it's going to keep growing.
Yeah, and I guess I think you mentioned that you have quite a few nationalities, um, and I'm sure quite a few languages as well.
Yeah.
Um, I'm sure that has obviously really positive effects for the diversity of your company as well.
hmm
Yeah.
It's really entertaining, the conversations we can have with all the different cultures thrown in,
Yeah.
even just even just the way we use different languages, even if it is just English. It's yeah, you can learn a lot about different cultures.
Yeah. So now is time for our question and answer section. So if you guys have any questions that you want to leave in the question tab, I know I see one question here in the chat tab. We'll also get to that one. Leave your questions there and we'll get to them now. I'll actually just start with the one in the chat section from Jana. What's the best way to onboard and train a remote worker, Sarah?
I'll speak to our way, which we've been honing and refining. So, not to say it's the absolute best way out there, but I think it works quite well. And again, we ask for feedback from it with every new start who's gone through it, and we tweak and refine them. Yeah, it's working well for us. So we actually have like an operations onboarding, and then the team specific onboarding as well. We're using Trello for it just now, which as a tool works for us. So we have our onboarding for the operations side is very focused on first of all, the person getting to know everything they need to know about the company, and even things like the basics, like here are the calls you're going to have, here are all the tools you need to go and log into, here are the meetings that we're going to have throughout it and whatnot, but also to do with really getting to know that person. So again, we're not in an office, so you can't just wander up and introduce yourself. So we have calls with different people within the company, obviously within their own team. We actually ask every single new starter who joins with us to write a list and post it to Discourse of 10 interesting facts about themselves, which is just a really nice, fairly simple way of getting to see a little bit about that person and what their interests are, what their life is like. Obviously, all of our team can then go and comment, they can share stories. It's a really interesting way of finding out about somebody who you might not meet for the next 6 months or so. But we also have then the role-specific onboarding, which each different department and team will take somebody through. So a lot of it for us is working through Trello boards, having calls with people, really trying to throw them into it so they get integrated and as settled as they can, as quickly as they can.
Mm-hmm. And how did you find that process yourself, or did you develop that process?
No, I didn't develop. My colleague developed it. I actually had a slightly different onboarding experience because my first week with Hotjar was at a company retreat. So my first day was being flown out to Park City in Utah. So I met everybody straight off the bat, which isn't. It's some other people have always also experienced like this, but it's not the norm. So I did have a slightly different onboarding, which meant when I took my onboarding call with Mariella the next Monday, it was more, I'd already met her. I knew what she was like. We chatted. It was more just going through the formalities.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it's been tweaked quite a lot since then. But yeah, we have a few people who have done the same thing of starting at a company meetup. I'm really glad I did. I love working remotely and I wouldn't change it for the world, but it was really fun to be able to just meet people straight away.
Yeah.
But I will say, I think it's probably a more nerve-wracking way to start because suddenly you're meeting the entire company and spending
Yeah.
a week with them in a foreign country.
Yeah, I think I forget how stressful. Well, not stress. It's like a good kind of stressful when you join a company and all of a sudden you have to meet all of your colleagues. You have to,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, get to know what everyone does. I feel like even though I mean that's the only experience I personally know, but I also think it might be quite nice to do it almost on your own terms, where you slowly get to know everyone, and it's a bit
Mm-hmm.
less, yeah, so confronting, I guess.
Yeah, you can throw yourself in as much or as little as you like, which usually is the way with Hotjar. You can be as talkative in the kitchen, in a team room, in a different Slack channels as you want to be.
Yeah,
Or so some people are more so than others, but with a retreat, you're just thrown in, kind
yeah,
of sink or swim.
yeah. So we have another question here. Do you have some kind of substitute for office policies for remote employees?
Yeah, so we use Confluence is where we document all of our policies, which is things like everything you might need to know. Like our core values are on there. We do actually have, in terms of the office policies, if you're referring more to behavior and interactions within the office, we actually have like a guideline, you could call it, for company meetups.
Okay.
So kind of do's and don'ts, I guess, for when all these different people, like 70 people, again, from a lot of different countries, different backgrounds, are getting together.
Yeah.
And so we have our kind of, maybe that would be our version of office guidelines. It's more to do with the twice a year we do meet up.
Yeah. And any rules of thumb when you're communicating over Slack?
Again, avoiding politics and religion is one that's kind of vaguely mentioned, but isn't always stuck to. But I think just making sure to respect other people, working with respect is one of our core values, and we're all going to have different opinions and different things. But working over Slack, we're actually something we're looking into just now in terms of how we use it and how we use each of our communication tools to communicate. And we all have slightly different styles, and some people would rather that you send them an email if you want to ask them something. Some people would rather you just ping them in Slack so they won't lose it in their inbox. So yeah, it's actually something we've grown quite a lot, and with our growth, we need to make sure our collaboration and our communication methods are working accordingly. So it's a project we're going through just now to try and streamline this and get the entire company aligned into some kind of, I guess, umbrella guidelines. We don't want to be too prescriptive with it, but to make sure that as a company we are aligned in how we communicate.
Right. And as the company grows, are there other ways that you're also thinking about scaling this remote remote work vision that you guys have?
In terms of growing the team, or
Yeah.
for now, I think continuing as we are. So we always obviously have a recruitment forecast the same way anybody would.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think just making sure that we're keeping an eye on hiring when we need to hire, being sure that we need this person, being sure where we need them as well, actually, is an important aspect for us. Some roles, as I said, about 80% of us are based in the Europe or African time zones. Some
Yeah.
are over in the Americas. So trying to make sure we're keeping an eye on where it makes most sense for that particular role to be and whether or not they can be in either. But in terms of scaling up, yeah, really we're continuing as we are, yet tweaking everything. So following through our hiring processes, making sure it's the right time to make some hires. We had a slower year, yes, this year because we grew a lot the year previously. So we
Mm-hmm.
tried to slow that down a little bit this year because we wanted to make sure our teams could settle into each other and really form strong connections with each other before adding more and more people into each team. So yeah, within 2019, we'll be ramping this up a little bit more again.
So you mentioned kind of people all over the place and thinking about where you needed people. Time zones are a consideration for you guys?
Yeah, so we have a time zone restrictions for every single role that we post.
Okay.
Some they're not particularly narrow. Again, most of us can be working anywhere within Europe or Africa or the Middle East. It kind of works well with it as well. But for every job that we post, we will write at the top of it where we need the candidate to be based. And again, it's based on a time zone. So if we say GMT, you don't have to be in London, you can be anywhere within that time zone, but it tends to be a few hours span. Or the Americas, it's often East Coast Americas, which again covers anywhere in Eastern Coast, US and Canada, but also a lot of South and Central America.
Well, East Coast is my favorite coast, Washington, D.C. So all for that.
Good.
We also have another question here. Do you compensate employees who want to work from a co-working space?
Yes. So Hotjar offers a lot of different perks, and one of our perks is a working space allowance. So
Mm-hmm.
each of us gets €200 each a month to spend on your working space. So you could spend that on a co-working space if you wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
If you work from home, I know some people use it for their internet bills or to have a cleaner come in and deal with their working space. You can buy snacks with it. Um, yeah, if you want to work from coffee shops, you can use it to buy coffee from that place. Anything to make sure that you have a comfortable working environment in whichever way works best for you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And another question here. Would you say that your employer branding needs to be a little bit different when you're only hiring for remote roles?
I guess everybody's employer branding is unique to them. So for us, it feeds into it quite a lot. We speak about it straight off the bat on our careers page. We speak about the culture and how we are made up of this very wide mix of people because we are from around the world. Um, so I think it needs to be specific more to the company's identity, which for us, being remote is a large part of our identity. So that naturally feeds into it.
Mm-hmm. And another one here. Um, do you keep remote? Do you keep remote employees engaged in the long term?
Yes, I would say so. We actually have a really good turnover rate here at Hotjar. We do quite a lot of, we put conscious effort in trying to keep people engaged because we're remote. So in terms of the social element, which tends to come with the workplace,
Mm-hmm.
obviously you can't just go for a beer after work on a Friday. So we put conscious effort into try and keep people engaged throughout their life cycle here at Hotjar. It's something we're still growing with because we're a fairly young company, so we now have a people ops team. So it's our that's part of our work is to keep people engaged, both in their day-to-day life, but also in the long term here at Hotjar. It's something we're very conscious of, but we are very lucky so far in that we do have a very low turnover rate, which again I think is a lot to do with the atmosphere and the environment and how Hotjar treats its team members.
Are there any special initiatives on that engagement in that engagement area that you can share with us?
I'm trying to I'll think of a small one and a bigger one. So one of the small ones, we have a bonfire call each Wednesday afternoon. Um, I'm not sure I can answer you why it's called a bonfire call, and I'm thinking about it, but every Wednesday, and we call Wednesday working Wednesdays. We try to avoid having any meetings so that your schedule should be clear, so then you can just get on and fire through all the work that you need to fire through.
Right.
So every Wednesday afternoon we have this call, and it's just it's really a social hour. So again, we can't just go for a beer after work together. But what we can do is get on a call, and sometimes we'll play games, sometimes we'll just chat about anything. Sometimes we have specific topics that we want everybody to chat about.
Mhm.
But it's just a time to join if you want to. Don't worry if you don't want to. But a time to get to know your team members in a more relaxed, sociable atmosphere. And to do with keeping people engaged and also getting to know each other better. One of the newer budgets we have is the working together budget. So we
Mhm.
had it as a trial this year, and our executive team confirmed to us recently they were going to continue it as a permanent budget. So this budget allows, it's €2,000 each. So every person has to spend on traveling to and working with one of your co-workers. So some people went over to Malta, worked together. Those of us who were in Tenerife before our meetup were using that budget. We've had trips to New York and Ireland and South Africa, Cyprus. But the idea is to travel to where somebody lives and is based, and you can spend a few days or however long you like working with them and seeing how remote life works for them and getting that face-to-face time with them as well.
Yeah. Actually, I myself am doing that when I go to DC for Christmas.
Oh,
I'm
great.
with our community manager who actually lives in Pennsylvania. So she's actually coming to DC, and we're going to work together, get some FaceTime in. So it's quite nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's great. I love it. And obviously, we kind of encourage people to combine it for different budgets, like their holiday budget as well. So if you're
Mhm.
going to travel all the way over to see our Canadian team member, it's quite a long haul flight for most of us. So you may as well, whilst you're there, take some time off and enjoy Canada as well.
Mhm. So we have someone here asking if there was anything for Hotjar, any jobs potentially for remote work in India.
Unfortunately not. We haven't actually started extending our time zones as far as or into Asia so far.
Hmm.
Again, the Middle East would be the furthest east that we are so far. But
Hmm.
no, most of our jobs are focused, or all of them are focused either the Americas, but mostly Europe and Africa.
Hmm.
It's not to say we won't at some point in the future decide that it's much more beneficial to us to have people who are further east and into Asia, but not for now.
Okay. Um, we also have a question here. Is it a problem that employees communicate privately more than publicly? And do you prevent this in any way?
We don't prevent it in any way. So on Slack, I don't know how many people listening are aware, but on Slack, even the workspace owner can't see the full list of private channels. Obviously, can't see the chat people are having between each other. And no, it's not something we try to limit. And we want people to communicate. We have different groups as well, which are purposefully locked down channels on Slack. Like one room for is a women only room called Hotjarettes, and then we have our LGBTQ room called Team Rainbow. And these are lockdown rooms that people, I guess you can call them a safe space for these groups to be in. So
Mm-hmm.
no, private communication is not something we discourage or lock down on. The more people communicate with each other, the better they're going to know each other, know their working styles. It's just going to be beneficial overall for the company.
Yeah. Do you find yourself that there's actually quite a lot of private communication, at least on your end?
It's private in terms of one-to-one. It's not so open, you mean?
Yeah.
So I guess we do have a lot of one-to-one chats, but they're one-to-one because it makes sense to be talking to that particular person about that particular thing, but it's not to say they're private in terms of trying to keep information hidden. We're very transparent with our information in Hotjar purposefully, because again, I think communication is one of those areas where when it starts going slightly downhill within the company, it's when morale starts going down with it. We're very transparent. We have our company monthly meetings where we go through even the financials. Everybody has access to the financial spreadsheet. Whenever they want to go and look at it, we speak through on our weekly demos about what each team have been doing that week. So whilst, yeah, lots of private conversations in terms of one-to-one chats definitely go on, and teams are chatting within themselves, we try to make sure everybody's aware of what they need to know. We don't want to flood people with information because there's a lot of information happening within the company that team A needs to know, but team B doesn't. But we try to make sure everybody's as up to date and on top of things as they can be in terms of all the information which is important company wide or affect different teams in the company.
Mhm. So we have another one here in the question section. Next to Slack, what other applications/programs does Hotjar use or would recommend?
So we use a few different tools. Slack is our main day-to-day communication tool, and we use Discourse for it's like a forum type tool. So you can have bigger conversations on there where you want to get feedback from people, or if the information isn't finalized, Discourse is a really good place to have that information. We use Hotjar when we need to have surveys for the team as well. So use our own Hotjar surveys.
Mhm.
We use Confluence as our where our manuals and whatnot are kept. So any finished information is kept in Confluence. Obviously email, but we use much less email than I think traditional office-based companies use. And then there's all the different tools which different groups use. So the devs have Jira. We have Trello. Some people do project management in Trello. Some people use Asana. We have a few different tools.
Yeah, I think we also have quite a diverse tool set here as well. But I can definitely recommend Confluence for managing documents and stuff like this. It's
Mm-hmm.
actually quite nice. We also have like our own employee profiles on Confluence that everybody has to do in their onboarding. So they have to write a little section about themselves, put the photo, and yeah, something of interest that your colleagues
Mm-hmm.
might not know about you, which I quite
Oh,
like.
that's cool. You use Confluence for that.
Yeah.
We actually have Pingboard, which is one really good way for people to try and find out names and match names and faces. So Pingboard has this game. So it's where we have our employee profiles, and
Yeah.
they have a game where it's just you have to be a photo will come up and you have to say out of multiple choice answers who it is, and it's a scoreboard. And there's a lot of quite competitive people within Hotjar, so people love playing this game, especially before the retreats. It's really useful to make sure that you know whose name goes with which face.
I love that. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was
Do
really good fun.
you also do like fun facts about the people, or is it mostly just like what they do, their name, etc.?
So people can write a profile in there. That's more of kind of we don't force people to write it. It's so it's in there, the option is there, but we do link to it from the 10 interesting facts everybody writes on Discourse. We link to it from Pingboard, but we have it on Discourse so that the conversation can happen below it, so people can comment back and forth on the interesting facts.
Nice. We also have a question here. So I think what online tools have you used to manage projects and communicate with your coworkers? I think we kind of already covered that.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and how frequently should you have one-to-ones? This person also manages remote teams, and he said he conducts only once a week.
Yeah, once a week is the same for us as well. Different teams were doing this differently, so we try to bring in some alignment. But we have them once a week. They tend to be my one-to-one is an hour. I think some teams do it for half an hour, but I find an hour to be at least scheduling the time for an hour to be super useful. If it doesn't run for the full hour, that's fine. Sometimes it might go over depending on what you've got going on that week. But yeah, I think once a week is really useful so you can touch in with that person.
Yeah,
We do also use 15.5 as one of our engagement tools. And for that, everybody in the company will fill out their 15.5 once every 2 weeks. So it's an engagement tool. Ask how you're feeling on a scale of 1 to 5. Ask certain questions each time you fill it in, and then certain optional rotating questions as well.
nice. Yeah, I know. I know a lot of companies have the happy face, medium face, upset face,
Mm-hmm.
kind of as like your weekly, like how did your week go, or something like this.
Mm-hmm.
Also helps for us. Do you guys do stand-ups also on Slack?
Not on Slack. So again, different teams in the company will do it slightly differently. I know some teams have dropped off the daily stand-up and gone down to slightly different systems. But I guess a norm or a standard for a lot of teams in the company will have a daily stand-up on Google Meet. And then a retro as well, planning at the start of the week, stand-ups each day, and then a retro on a Friday.
Cool. Well, I think that's all of the questions that we have currently. So I think, well, yeah, I just want to thank you for joining us today, Sarah. Really appreciate all the insights. And for those of you who have joined us, if you have any questions that you didn't think of during the webinar, you can post them on TAinnovators and I'll forward them to Sarah as well. So she'll get back to you. Also, check out our blog. As I said, there's going to be a blog post later this week about a recruiter who, yeah, recruited remotely from her camper van for a year. So it's quite interesting. And yeah, thank you for joining us today, and thank you, Sarah.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
All right.